I thank the chairman. Mr. Houck, after your family was raided in the early morning in front of your family, has the Biden administration in any way, shape, or form apologized for what they did to you or your family?
No, Congressman.
No apology?
No.
None. And as we've heard today, you were specifically targeted because you're an activist. You're a pro-life activist.
Correct.
Question for Ms. Camp. Earlier, you mentioned in your reports, you were quoting articles in which the FBI made statements about attacks on abortion clinics. How many statements by the FBI have there been on attacks on crisis pregnancy centers?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I don't have that information.
Right, because I'm not aware of there being any. What percentage of abortion-related violence cases or threats cases or cases of violence or threats are threats against pro-life organizations?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
What percentage of abortion-related violence cases or threats cases are cases of violence or threats against pro-life organizations? The answer is 70%, according to FBI Director Wray, that well-known, pro-life activist. 70%, according to FBI Director Wray. Another question. You serve as the Chief Legal and Strategy Officer at the National Abortion Federation, correct?
Yes.
In this role, have you ever spoken with anyone in the Biden Department of Justice or Biden administration specifically about FACE Act enforcement or abortion?
I have not.
Okay, so you as the Chief Legal and Strategy Officer for the National Abortion Federation, you have had no contact with President Biden's abortion task force.
Let me be accurate. I believe I may have had contact. I don't think so, but I may have. But on the issue of FACE enforcement, no, I have not.
Okay, in 2015, the Center for Medical Progress released a video in which you stated, quote, "I'm like, oh my God, I get it. When the skull is broken, that's really sharp. I get it. I understand why people are talking about getting that skull out, that culvarium. Culvarium being an incomplete skull. When abortion has crushed the skulls of babies to kill them, what physical risks are there for the baby?"
So, Congressman, thank you for the question. It allows me to clarify that the media products you're referring to stoked a massive uptick in violence. Those heavily edited, misleadingly edited media products caused 3 murders and 9 woundings in Colorado Springs in 2015.
The question was about the baby and the skull crushing that is, I think, a direct quote attributed to you.
Well, the folks who distributed those media products may have attributed something to me. I can't speak to.
So, true or false, did you say that? I'm like, oh my God, I get it. When the skull is broken, that's really sharp. Did you say that?
It's impossible to know, Congressman.
Would you have said that? Is that something you would have said?
I don't know, Congressman.
You don't know. You don't know if you talked about the crushing of the skull of a baby. You don't remember having said something like that.
What I do.
I'm pretty confident I've never said something like that. I'm quite confident my colleagues here have never said something like that. Have you ever said something about crushing the skull of the baby, particularly in that kind of a setup?
I believe, Congressman, that we all came here today to agree that violence is never an appropriate response to policy differences.
That seems pretty violent, the crushing of the skull of a baby. I think that actually is the definition of violence. And I think the question here is whether or not we are going to acknowledge and recognize that reality and the extent to which now the federal government has been weaponized against the people who want to acknowledge that reality. That's the question. Mr. Houck has stood up and said, I'd like to recognize the reality of the violence against a baby. And by the way, the violence against the mother who's been sold a myth by radical leftists in the name of baby killing. They've been sold a myth that it is somehow healthy and good for them or better than for them. And if someone dares stands up like Mr. Houck, then he's been targeted, as my colleague acknowledged from this very dais, targeted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which we saw was weaponized specifically against the President of the United States, as we just saw in the Durham report, is weaponized against average citizens. Mr. Houck, do you think $38.5 $5 billion is sufficient funds for the Department of Justice? Or do you think maybe it's too many funds if they're carrying out actions against people like you?
I would think it's too many funds.
I yield back.
Thank you.